From densely forested parks where it's said the dead roam amongst the foliage, to dry lake beds boasting ancient cemeteries and centuries-old curses, are you ready for the most haunted hikes in Texas? Number 5. Soldier's Waterhole Spring. Soldier's Waterhole Spring, located off US Route 190 and County Road 412 near Brady, Texas, is a landmark site that played an integral role in the survival of many traveling the region through the 18th and 19th centuries. Historically, the hole hosted native tribes for millennia, and eventually even a larger camp-like setup. But as settlements drove west and tensions between settlers and natives grew, a military road was constructed through the early 1800s to protect pioneers. In 1850, troops under the command of Robert E. Lee would stop at the Waterhole to rest for a time, while on patrol for native war parties. And through the remainder of the Civil War, as well as for a good while afterwards, it would act as a campsite. In 1964, the hole's prominent stone marker was established by the McCulloch County Historical Society, ensuring the historically significant location's remembrance and continued maintenance. Soldier's Waterhole Spring remains a popular destination for tourists and local history buffs alike, offering up a range of trails, notable viewpoints, and, according to legend, its fair share of paranormal activity, with those braving the area's expanse reporting extreme cold spots in the middle of summer, shadowy figures that stalk the living, and encounters with full-bodied apparitions in old-fashioned clothing or even Civil War era garb. Several visitors have recounted interacting at great lengths with persons they'd assumed at the time were living, only to turn for a second and find they'd vanished entirely. And phantom firelights have been sighted at night, often accompanied by the uncomfortable sensation of being closely watched. The most famous story surrounding the Waterhole tells that in 1869, a group of native scouts ambushed and massacred an entire wagon party, killing a total of 18 men, women, and children, all of whom were buried near. And some have described hearing the chilling sounds of gunshots, screaming, drums, and war cries emanating from thin air. Number 4. River Legacy Parks. River Legacy Parks, located off of Green Oaks Boulevard along the Trinity River in northern Arlington, is a 1,300-acre city park offering an impressive range of trailheads, picnic areas, and even a hands-on science center. Historically, in 1988, in an effort to better manage land donated to the city, the River Legacy Foundation was formed and set to work developing a new park. River Legacy Park would officially open in 1990 and would feature all new trails, river overlooks, picnic areas, and a large playground. Though the park started at its allotted 376 acres, over time, additional land was donated by interests the Ryan Companies, Perry R. Bass, and Texas Industries, bringing it up to its current size. In 1996, the River Legacy Living Science Center was open to the public, offering an assortment of interactive exhibits, aquariums and terrariums, and other environmentally educational opportunities. River Legacy Parks remains active to this day as an urban oasis with a diverse ecological system consisting of wetlands, forests, and even prairies, all of which are open to the public. Though its existence has been brief, a number of stories of the supernatural have sprouted up from River Legacy, with those braving its bounds, especially after dark, reporting disembodied screams and shrieks from high in trees, and even the disembodied galloping of horse hooves. One popular legend tells that during the Civil War, Union spies roamed these very forests, and that many were captured and subsequently executed by Confederate forces. The apparitions of soldiers from both sides have been encountered and are often described as appearing so real, onlookers think them reenactments before watching them fade away. Lastly, at the Screaming Bridge, it's said that if one crosses at night, the names of a handful of kids that were killed in a car wreck will appear in the waters below. And some tales tell a gateway to hell was opened somewhere along the park's trails, where hikers have recounted sighting ghostly bodies hanging from trees or encounters with demonic creatures. Number 3. Camp Rio at Lula Sam's. Camp Rio at Lula Sam's, located in western Brownsville, atop the old Camp Lula Sam's, is an 85.7-acre site containing an expanse of dense forest alongside chunks of untouched wildlife preserve. Historically, in 1946, one Earl C. Sam's charitable foundation was established in New York in an effort to assist in educational, medicinal, conservational, and religious costs. Sam's would pass on in 1950 and would leave his charity in the hands of his daughters, who'd both marry and settle into the Brownsville area. Camp Lula Sam's was established by the foundation in 1953 and was gifted to the Girl Scouts of South Texas. It would stay active through the 1990s, and later in 1997 was purchased by the director of the Gladys Porter Zoo. In 2016, Camp Rio was opened by the Idea Public Schools, and in 2019, the school system would purchase the property, launching programs offering overnight stays and educational opportunities for children that persist into the present. From Camp Lula Sam's earliest years, an array of ghost stories surrounding the forest's paranormal activity have been shared over many a fire pit, activity which continues to this very day, with both staff and campers reporting orbs visible to the naked eye, translucent entities sighted wandering about, and voices heard from cabins that are locked and empty. One popular tale passed down through generations tells that long ago, a camp counselor began hearing voices, with some versions claiming that he was actually possessed. It's said that eventually he went insane and brutally murdered all of the Girl Scouts in their cabins as they slept, and that shortly after the camp was closed down. While some claim that these are just stories and that no such crime ever occurred, others tell it was covered up by local law enforcement as not to tarnish the county's reputation. Now, some claim that at night, one can hear the horrifying sounds of scouts screaming in the distance, and that their spirits often manifest as beautiful lights amongst the trees. A final story tells that deep within the forest there lies a cabin filled with dolls, which some claim are either possessed or cursed. It's said that those who have gotten too near this cabin have heard disembodied voices, and an incessant ringing that becomes so strong it's caused permanent hearing damage. Number 2. Shafter Lake. Shafter Lake, located just northwest of Andrews, Texas, is a name shared both by a historic ghost town as well as by an adjacent shallow alkali playa lake, which only holds small amounts of water and is mostly dry and crusted. Historically, this lake was first discovered in 1875 by Army officer William R. Shafter, after whom it takes its name, and who was credited with defending the region from native attack for long enough for the land to be settled. Initially called Salt Lake, settlers would first begin arriving to the area through the late 19th century, and in 1907, after plans for a town were laid, it's recorded that no less than 50 homes stood within the next year. In 1908, the Shafter Lake Cemetery was established on the shore opposite the town, and while the community would grow for a time, in 1910, after the title of county seat was stolen by Andrews, locals would begin moving elsewhere. By 1912, the old community was all but deserted, and by 1980, only its cemetery remained. Today, the area is operated as a ranch, with most of its lands utilized as private property, and nothing more than humble historic markers to honor the civilization that once stood in their stead. The most popular local legend surrounding Shafter tells that in the community's earliest days, a smallpox outbreak resulted in countless lost lives, and that later, when locals were in the process of leaving town, those who stayed behind began hearing the disembodied crying and laughter of children from outside their homes, or encountering shadowy silhouettes that would appear for seconds to terrify before instantly fading. These disturbing phenomena are said to persist into the present, with many who visit the lake, and those fortunate enough to have seen the town site, also reporting orbs and strange mists visible to the naked eye, otherworldly noises across the dry expanse, and encounters with a range of full-bodied apparitions in clothing spanning the eras. A group of ghostly soldiers on horseback has been sighted on the horizon, always at a range. Many suspect these are the spirits of none other than Shafter and his men, forever guarding their beloved claim. One final fable tells of a hair-raising presence known as the White Lady, a banshee-like thing often sighted floating the lake bed. Several have attempted to make communication with the lady, only to watch in horror as she turns and swiftly charges them with an otherworldly shriek before vanishing at the moment of would-be impact. Number 1. McDowell Hole. McDowell Hole, located along Greens Creek, just east of Dublin, Texas, is an old watering hole that, over time, has played witness to an unbelievable number of tragic deaths. Historically, through the early 1800s, the site held a small cabin. However, in 1855, this structure was found burned to the ground in what was suspected to be a native raid. The bodies of a young couple, their son and infant daughter, were discovered in the ruin and were later laid to rest at a nearby spring. Jim McDowell, after whom the hole takes its name, would move to the area through the 1850s and would settle to work on a cabin which, upon his death in 1860, would be passed down to his son, also Jim. And later the same year, Jim's cousin Charlie Papworth would move his family on to this land. Chillingly, in 1865, while Charlie was away, his wife Jenny and their newborn vanished without a trace. Many at the time suspected murdered by one Mr. Brownlow from town. And in 1867, amidst rumors of stolen horses, a gang of vigilantes hanged Charlie. Luckily, his son Temple managed to cut him free before he'd taken his final breath, and the two were able to flee the area. The old family plot was subsequently passed through a string of owners over the years and eventually encircled in farmland. To visit McDowell Hole in the present, one can travel east from Dublin along Highway 6 until reaching County Road 520, which they can then follow north until arriving at some railroad tracks. The hole is about 100 yards to the east of these tracks. Understandably, McDowell Hole is surrounded by a number of urban legends and tales of the inexplicable stemming from its brutal past, and many braving adventures through the area have reported disembodied voices and screams, sudden and dangerous temperature drops, the sounds of a woman and baby heard crying together, and the sensation of being tapped, pushed, or even hit by unseen hands. Also reported through the site are accounts of strange flashing lights on nearby roads, banging noises on the roofs of cars, and vehicles stalling or refusing to start entirely. The most famous legend surrounding McDowell tells that through the 1870s, one Mr. Keith, accompanied by his son, braved a few nights in the abandoned Papworth cabin while utilizing its fields for grazing. The duo would later reveal that each night there was a chilling scratching sound on the front door, after which the cabin would become suddenly cold. On their last night, upon opening the door, Mr. Keith was shocked to find the ghostly form of Jenny holding her baby. He called to her, resulting in her emitting an unearthly scream before vanishing with a pop. This story furthers to tell that later through the 1870s, one Charlie Atchison moved into the cabin and was later found dead with all windows and doors boarded up around him. His expired face bore an expression of utter terror, and some claim old Charlie was quite literally scared to death by Jenny. Through the 1880s, infamous train-robbing brothers Reuben and Jim Burroughs were dared to stay in the haunted cabin. It's recorded that when a group from town went to retrieve them, they were nowhere to be found, but that the cabin's walls and ceiling were riddled with bullet holes. Later, on his deathbed, Jim recalled the dare and claimed that on the first night, they'd encountered Jenny's ghost while drinking and didn't think much of it, but that on the second, they had panicked and began shooting at her before realizing what they were up against and hightailing it out of there. Shockingly, in 1885, while on his deathbed, it said that Mr. Brownlow was visited by Jenny and her baby, and that seeing their spectral forms pushed him over the edge. He would eventually admit to killing them both and throwing their bodies into a well, many believe, finally allowing their souls to wander in peace. Stories of encounters with the spirits of Jenny and her baby persist into the present, though most now describe her as calm, her baby blissfully sleeping in her gentle arms. Taking into consideration its ridiculously dark and fascinating history, and coupling it with an impressive slew of ghost stories and purported otherworldly infestations, we felt McDowell Hole was the perfect choice as our pick for the most haunted hike in Texas. Thanks for tuning in for some of the most haunted hikes in Texas. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on. Throw us a like, and most importantly, share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. We'll see you all next time.